Welcome to our YouTube channel. This is Tim and Barb, and today we're going to be talking about racism then and now. This is an election year, and so as you know, this becomes a hot button topic every 4 years, but this time I believe more so than in times past.
Yep.
And so that's what we're going to cover. So I'm going to interview Barb today, and I'm going to ask her to be as raw and as truthful as she can be because these things are hard. It's hard to talk about, things of this nature and be completely honest about it. And I'm going to have her interview me at a later time, and you won't want to miss that because I can tell you I'm going to be as honest as I can about what it was like, and it's not pretty. And so, without further ado, I would just ask that you would click that subscribe buttons and the notifications so that when we come out with our next videos, that you won't miss a thing.
And be sure to like us too. We are funny at times.
Only when we're not trying to
be. Yeah, that's true.
Alrighty, so what I want to talk to first of all, this is Barbara. Where did you grow up and when?
Okay, I was giving away my age here, but I was born in 1953. I grew up in Alabama, a little town called Cordova, which is Walker County. And my dad was a National Guardsman. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. I'm the oldest of 6 kids that she was taking care of while Dad was working. And when he wasn't in his National Guard unit doing that thing, he was a TV and radio repairman. He had his own little shop. So when I grew up, I remember we weren't allowed to be around Black people at all. I mean, they had their area that they lived in. We had our area that we lived in. They had a brand new school in our town, which was awesome because we got to use it later. And I, of course, lived in an area that was we didn't have a lot of money, but we had a good place to live.
All right. And so you mentioned the school and how there was a separate but equal school, so to say,
Yes.
as it was in the South in those days. Now, you started school then in 1959.
Yes.
And in 1959, as you know, schools were segregated at that time.
They were segregated. Girls weren't allowed to wear pants. We all had to wear dresses or skirts.
All righty. And we'll leave that for a discussion
on another time.
The conservatism of the Church of God in the South.
No, that was the way the school was.
Oh, the school was that way.
Yeah, the school was that way.
Okay. Good. All right. So schools then, you say they were separated. When, can you remember what grade you was in when the schools were first integrated?
Well, in our school, I was 13, and so I was in the 8th grade. So, but before that, before our school became that way, there was that thing in Montgomery, Alabama, where everybody has seen, where the Black children were entered into the school there. Well, my dad, being in the National Guard, he was supposed to go that weekend to help, get that started. But because he was so racist, he stayed that weekend in jail rather than go and fight for their rights. So we all knew, that that's how it was. And go back just a little bit. Can I go back a little bit?
Okay.
To introduce a little other things. Because my dad was a radio repair and TV repairman, everybody in town came to him. It didn't matter what color your skin was. It didn't matter who you were. And a lot of times he didn't accept money. He just took whatever they had, like if they had canned goods or, something to give to the family, they would for him to repair their TV because most of the Black people didn't have the money, but they wanted their TV and radios. So anyway, but one time I was 7 years old. We had a playground, a play thing in the backyard, a playground thing like a swing set.
Mm-hmm.
And so this Black man came over with his children. I think he had 3 or 4 children. So we all went in the backyard and we all played together and had a good time. But as soon as that man left, my dad whipped us all with a belt for playing with those Black children. So it was terrible back then. And so I remember one time downtown, I was sitting in the car waiting for Mom, and there was a little Black girl standing there on the street, and I was just staring at her, trying to figure out what is the difference between her and me other than our skin. and she's like, "What are you staring at?" She scared me, and I
So
went
you're talking
over.
about the girl?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I went over and sat on the other side of the car so I could get away from her. She scared me. But anyway, those are the things that happened
Okay.
then.
And so that's what goes on in the mind of a
Yes.
child growing
Yes.
up in the segregated South.
Yes.
All right, so you talked a little bit about housing and how white people lived where they lived and black people lived where they lived. And
Right.
it certainly was that way where I grew up too, that we had a part of town, and you might say that it was on the other side of tracks, but we didn't have tracks. But it was almost a road that divided the area. And you talked about the difference in housing. Now, would you say that the housing was separate but equal, or would you say that white people generally lived in nicer places?
The white people generally lived in nicer places. Doesn't mean they were any bigger, but they were a little bit better. But the I don't know. It's kind of hard to talk about because I don't remember a lot of what went on because I was so young when that occurred. I just remember their homes were they called them shanties, I think. They were kind of like wooden shack buildings.
Yeah, you'd hear of tar paper shacks
Yeah.
and things like that.
So
Yeah.
their housing was not that great that I can remember, but I don't remember other than a couple. That's all I ever saw because they kind of lived out away from town.
Okay. So then this would get us into the area of job opportunities and the ability to make money, the ability to have a good life. And would you say the job opportunities for blacks in your area would have been as good as they were for whites?
Well, as time went on, they were. But when I was young, and I remember us going to the Birmingham Zoo, and we had colored water fountains and white water fountains, colored bathrooms, white bathrooms. And I remember the most of the jobs that the colored people had were like um, maintenance work, like sweeping and cleaning.
And she has moved into the old South with the colored people comment. So,
Well, that's what the sign said.
yeah.
I'm not calling them colored. I'm saying that's what the signs read.
Well, today we call people of color, used to
Right.
call colored, and I'm not too sure I understand the difference other than maybe the terminology colored does now have a negative stigma to it for whatever reason. I'm not
Yeah.
really sure. I don't know how that would be different than people of color, but it's all in semantics, and so we'll go with that from there. But the housing opportunities, let's say that a black person wanted to move into your neighborhood. What was their chance of doing that?
Well, when we moved to the Birmingham area. There was this little town called Fairfield, Alabama, and it was all white people. And I remember people in our church saying, well, there were some blacks moving in and they were moving out. So before you know it, that whole town was black because all the white people moved out because the black were moving in.
Okay, so that's white flight, as it were.
Yeah, white
okay.
flight as it was. But eventually that changed too. It just didn't stay that way for very long.
Right. And I think that a lot of the white flight thing is some of it stemmed from fear of what may happen, especially to property values, things of that nature. And also, um, a lot of people were afraid of crime.
Yes.
You know, they had a bad attitude towards minorities, whether founded or unfounded. It just was that way. And that's just how it was when we're talking about the 1960s, early 1970s for sure.
Yes.
Do you think that blacks were safe to go anywhere in the area that you lived at any time of day?
No, because there was another town where my grandparents lived in Winston County, Alabama. Now they had a sign right as you entered the county, and it said, "No blacks after dark, or you will be shot." And they had these huge barn buildings, and on the roof it said, "We did not join the Union," or something
It's
like
the free state of Winston.
Yeah, the free
right?
state of Winston. And so
Yes.
they were not a part of the Union they claimed. But anyway, that didn't last long either. Those signs eventually went down. As I got older, I stopped seeing those signs. They went away. So, so at first in the '60s and maybe even early '70s, there were places in Alabama that black people could not stay the night.
You talking about hotels or just towns or
towns in that town, specific towns. They could not stay the night there.
All right. So you grew up in the church. were churches in the South, if you walked into a church, is it likely that you would have saw black and white people or minorities, or would you have saw a lily white church or a full black church?
We had full black churches and full white churches. We did not segregate. We didn't go to their churches and
You didn't integrate.
yeah, integrate. There you
Yeah.
go. We didn't go to their churches and they didn't come to ours. Now I remember one time, it was in the 70s, I believe. We had our pastor had ministered to this family, and they were black family. So the grandmother decided to visit our church because, she loved our pastor. And she sat on the back pew, didn't bother anyone or say anything. She just came to church to hear the message. And some of the people in the church actually got upset and they said, if this woman's going to come to this church, I'm not coming here anymore. But that didn't last either. The pastor talked to the congregation and the lady and said, we're not having this. You know, they're welcome here just like you. And people finally got to be friends with her. And so her family and some others started coming to our church, and it became wonderful because there was so much love there for everybody that it didn't last. It's just that when you're growing up in the South in the 60s and 50s, you're taught that the blacks are a specific way, but then when you get to know them, they're just like us. And now I don't even see color. I know people say this all the time. I don't
And
see color.
it's very
But
cliche. Obviously,
yeah,
you do see
we
color,
do see color,
but at the same time, I understand the sentiment of that to mean that I don't care if you're black or white. If
yeah,
you have the same values and the same sensibilities as I do, then you're my friend.
right, right. And that's
and
how I look at it now. I don't even.
Sure, and I think that most people do. And the whole point of this video is to point out the differences in racism and systematic racism, because you hear this all the time. And the political left will say that there is systematic racism, that there is a racist behind every tree. Everything is the deck is completely stacked against you if you are a minority, and so we're trying to paint a picture of what it really is like to have the deck stacked against you. And I guarantee you that a black growing up in the South in the 60s or 70s, they're very happy with today's America because progress has been made. I really believe that in Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech that many of these things have completely come to fruition. He dreamed of his children playing alongside with the white children. He dreamed of people being judged on their content or their character rather than the color of their skin. And so many of these things have definitely come to pass to my way of thinking.
Yeah, they
have. But to many, maybe not.
Yeah.
But one thing is for sure, when we talked about church being integrated, this is a big deal to us because we're not talking about she didn't attend 1,000-member Church of the Almighty Dollar.
No.
We're talking about these are devout Christians, people that have committed their life to God and doing everything the Bible says, and yet in their heart there was still a darkness,
right?
A place that was needing a healing, a place that was needing delivering from the kind of thinking.
Yeah, because there was totally a misunderstanding of what everything was all about.
Well, yes. Let's talk about attitudes towards minorities. And you touched on that just a little bit. Well, they felt differently about blacks. But what is it that people were taught about blacks, or what was ingrained? I don't know. I can't remember a time of ever being taught anything about blacks being bad. And you probably can't either. But the feelings that people had that were conveyed, what do you think that a person in 1965, a white person in the South, thought of a black person?
Well, I know that
I want to enter. Let me. I'm gonna feed you just a little bit of an answer here. In 2007, Joe Biden said, "I mean, you got the first mainstream African American who is articulate, bright, clean, nice looking, doesn't emit a foul odor." You know, and this was a big old Freudian slip on Joe Biden's part.
It was.
That it showed you a lot of the heart of many, and he's an old man. You know, he grew up a long time ago. He's older than me. Yeah, he's a lot older than we are. And he still, in his heart and mind, that's a Freudian slip. That is saying what you really think. Okay, well, if he's the first African American who's articulate, what's he think about them? That they're not articulate? Are black Americans not articulate? I know of many. We listen to many on YouTube. We listen to Kevin's Corner. We listen to so many, ABL. We listen to so many
Hodge twins.
the Hodge twins. Yeah, well-spoken people, very articulate, much more articulate than Joe Biden, to
And
be
we
sure.
are.
Yeah, and so I love to watch these men, conservatives, and you know I have that kindred spirit with them, and so it's wonderful to see these guys and their channels and their thoughts. Bright, clean. You know, are blacks not bright? You know,
Well,
the first one you ever saw who was bright and clean. You know,
I know, it's crazy.
by the way, he didn't say doesn't emit a foul odor. I sort of did a little bit of creative mess to his quote, but everyone knows this quote. If you don't, it's worth looking up. But Joe Biden's speeches on blacks have been less than amazing.
Yeah.
And it does stem right back to the fact that he's an old white guy that really his heart never completely changed, I don't think. Because I just can't imagine, even in 2007, saying something like that. But enough of the rant on Joe Biden. This is not really so much what it was
Well,
about.
I wanted to go back to the school when you were talking to me about when they were first entered into our school.
Yes.
I was 13 in the 8th grade. Well, I very quickly learned that the things that I had been told by my dad, that they were dirty, they were, I don't know, smelled bad. I don't know what all he said because I was a kid and don't remember, and I just blocked it all out.
Well,
But-
here's the thing.
but the-
I'll okay. Let me ask you this, because these are things that in my past people believed about blacks. They believed that they weren't as smart as whites.
Yeah, that's true.
Very much so.
Yeah.
Very much they're not as smart, certainly not as educated, whether that's their own fault or not, but not as smart, just lacking the cognitive ability. Even if you were to educate a black, they could never reach the level of where whites were. And wouldn't you say that that was a sentiment that was held back
It
then?
was held back then, but like I said, when they started in our school, I quickly learned that they were smarter than me. Their school had been more strict on teaching than ours, so they knew a lot more than our 8th graders did. So they were flying by with straight A's when the rest of us were struggling for a C or a B. So, and I made friends. They made friends with me so quickly, and I made friends with them so quickly. And
That's because Barb didn't have any friends. So.
I had plenty of friends. But yeah, they were just, I don't know, I just fell in love with them and they fell in love with me. And but we still didn't see each other outside of school because of the adults' attitude and what they thought about things.
Well, to be sure, let's say when I was in high school, if a white girl were to date a black guy, would be a big.
Oh my goodness!
problem.
In our town, that did happen, and that girl got beat up by the black girls. So that did happen.
Yeah, and it wouldn't be just the black girls doing the beating in the area where I live. They would be completely ostracized. Both of them would be, and it would be a point where they would have no social standing whatsoever. They would be canceled, so to speak. And as horrible as that is how it was.
Yeah.
And that isn't a matter of my opinion or your opinion. You ask any person our age that grew up either in the South or maybe not even in the South at all, and it just was that way. It was ugly. The ideas towards minorities were terrible.
Yes.
I'm telling you that it was bad. And systematic, yes, it was. And we're going to move. We're going to segue into law enforcement aspect. Do you think that a black would get a fair shake with a cop just the same as a white would?
As far as I know, I didn't see any of them getting any kind of brutality in the town I lived in. They were treated just as equal as us, and I think that in our town there were more white people in jail than there were any blacks because, you know, they stayed to themselves. They didn't cause any trouble in our town. They did what they were supposed to. We did what we were supposed to, except for the people who didn't. You know?
Now, we know in Alabama, of course, law enforcement has a pretty bad stain on them. We know of the fire hoses turned on the protesters.
Yeah,
we know of the dogs cut loose on the kids and all these different things.
Of course, that was in Montgomery, though.
And we know also in Birmingham of the church bombing.
Yeah.
You know, and I don't know. I mean, you're old enough to remember it. Do you remember the church bombing?
Yeah, because that's when we lived in a town called, well, we moved to Hueytown, and then Inslee was just the town over from Hueytown. And I remember a little bit of it. And,
I think 4 young girls were killed there.
Right.
A pretty horrible thing. And to be sure, law enforcement, the problem with law enforcement in the South, in my view, and what I've been learned about was that if a black person did get arrested for something, they were most likely not, they were going to jail and they were going to get a harder hand. And
But-
if a white person committed a crime
Right.
against a black person, would they be punished for it?
Well, you've got to understand too, the Ku Klux Klan was very heavy back then, and I even think my dad might have been a member because he would come up missing some weekends, and we didn't know where he was. Mother didn't know where he was.
Sheets were missing.
Yeah, I don't know about the sheets missing, but anyway, I remember some people getting crosses burned in their yard by the Ku Klux Klan. So a lot of these bombings and stuff like that were done by the Ku Klux Klan, but then as time went on, they went into hiding with what they were doing. It wasn't so obvious as it was in the 60s and early 70s.
Right. Okay, so we do know that the Ku Klux Klan was active in the South for sure.
Yep.
It was still going on in the 60s.
Yep.
Now, I want to relate this to the world of today. Now, schools obviously today, in the area where you grew up, do you believe that it would be the same as it was then?
No.
Now, black kids where I was at usually weren't in extracurricular activities. They usually weren't allowed to play in the reindeer games too much, I don't think. And if they were sort of marginalized, I feel like.
Well, when they started coming to our school, they took their brand new school and turned it into a VOTEC school. So we went to school half a day at our school and then half a day at their school to take a training. I took business and office education. My sister took commercial sewing, but that was presented for both black and whites. We both got bused,
right,
to that school half a day,
okay,
and then bused back to the main school.
All right, and we'll move through these fairly fast as we talk about today,
Okay.
as opposed to the housing. We talked about how the housing was very much, you live here and we live here, never the two shall meet. If you try to move into our neighborhood, honestly, in our area, there were a lot of small towns where if a black family moved into the town, they'd burn their house down.
Is that right?
Oh yeah,
I don't remember that happening.
It did happen in northern Missouri. There are little towns that, and I'd say almost to this day, there is little or no blacks to be found. A town of 1,000, there might be a couple of blacks today where their house would have been burnt down 40 years ago.
Right. Right.
And so I would definitely have to say that the situation is much better now. Blacks can live where they want now.
Right.
And so can whites or anybody else. I don't think that there's any disputing that if you have the money to buy a house and you go put up an offer, if a person's selling that house will be purchased.
Right.
Now, I lived in Louisiana in the 80s, so this isn't ancient history, but in the 80s, my neighbors had a property and a black family offered them, cash on the barrelhead, would have paid them asking price, no trying to finagle with it, and they would not sell because they knew that in that neighborhood, if they were to sell a property to a black family, they were going to face the consequences. They were going to be treated. Now, this don't happen so much anymore. Now, there might be somewhere out in the sticks where you've got, a bunch of real fools. And that's, we're not saying that racism doesn't exist today. It most certainly does. But to the degree that it existed in the 60s or 70s, not so much.
No.
Not anybody that has any honesty about them could say that it hasn't improved absolutely tremendously. Right. Today, and I'm going to walk through this fairly quickly, churches today are fully integrated.
Yes.
We go to a church where I would say way less than 50% of the people are white. I'd say maybe 35 or 40%
right.
maybe.
Right.
And but it's not it's not like all the others are blacks. We have a large amount of Asians, Koreans, and things of this nature. But this doesn't matter to us because we love our church. We love the people there, and they are like-minded with us.
Yes.
Where it pertains to the Bible and God, where it pertains to the values that we hold, these people are truly our brothers and sisters.
Yes, they are.
This couldn't have happened in the 60s.
No.
It could not have happened. No matter how much we might want to think that it could have happened, we had not evolved to that point even in Christian world. So yes. It's very different. Attitudes towards minorities, very different today than they were
very
then.
Different.
I'm telling you that, when I was growing up, it was just instilled in you somehow. It was almost in your DNA. Now, I know somebody made this horrible statement, but it is indeed in our DNA as white people to be horribly racist, and that's not true.
No, that's not true at all.
That's not true. We grew up in an area and in places where it was just, the attitude towards minorities were that they were less than. They were literally, almost Untermenschen as you had in Germany, where the Hitler felt like if you wasn't an Aryan that you was less than, and it was almost that way here.
Yes.
It was very very bad. Now nobody was doing it. Normal people weren't out to kill anyone or
No.
hurt anyone, and even
No.
then, the average white person in the
Even
South.
the demonstrations that the black did in the towns, the most that got happened to them was the water hoses turned on them, or maybe dogs, but
Well,
they
that's
weren't.
bad enough.
It's bad enough, yes, but they weren't shot,
Right.
and so unless
Nor did the demonstrators do any burning, looting, or
no,
murdering.
they
There
didn't
wasn't any
destroy
of
the
that going
towns like they
on.
are now. That's just way.
I do long for the types of demonstrations and protests that Martin Luther King had.
Yes.
That he was, he believed in nonviolence, and boy, would that, boy, do we need Martin Luther King today.
Yeah.
I would say we really
Yeah.
do. So, what are your thoughts overall? Have we reached the pinnacle of race relations? Is this like a utopia, and there are no problems now?
Well, I wouldn't say there aren't any problems, but in the places, areas, like we live in and where the military uh, installations are, you just don't see that because being in the military and working in military areas with the businesses, I mean, if we fought like they're doing in
Portland or
Portland
wherever.
and wherever, our towns wouldn't exist because they're so small. But in those towns are getting to the point they can't exist because every bit thing's being destroyed. So in our area, we just integrate and we
We
do
live
the
our
same
life.
thing. We live
We live our
They
lives.
live their lives, and I have so many friends I'm in contact with. I mean, there's a lady out here we go walking with, and I've worked with, and people that I've just grown to love, and they love me, and we don't even think about color. We just like, I mean, I've been
It
to.
doesn't become an
It doesn't
issue,
become
and I
it's
think
not an issue at all.
it makes for a sad life when
It
you
really
have to
does.
sit around and worry and be suspicious of other people's motives and be suspicious of how they feel about you. And if you feel, aught towards them, then that's your problem.
Yeah.
So it's a horrible thing. So we're not here to say that there is no racism. There is, and there always will be. I don't believe for 1 second that there's any chance that you're going to eradicate racism. You're not going to do it. There's
You might
always
eradicate it in the area where you are because of the situations and the circumstances, and because that
but there'll always be some fool.
Yeah,
There's
there'll always be someone, but
Okay, so that's our what we was trying to convey, and I hope that we did was that America today is a much better place than America of 1965, 1975.
Yes.
When people talk about systematic racism, they need to talk to some older people. Find some people that can sit down and honestly discuss what it was like and how far we've really come.
Yeah.
We've come a long way.
We have. And one thing I wanted to say too, that even though the black people were poor growing up, we had white people just as poor. I mean, it was not.
It wasn't the big white privilege thing.
Yeah, it wasn't a big white privilege thing. I mean,
no, everybody was poor.
Everybody was poor.
And where I grew up, it was that way mostly. I mean, we had some people that had a little more money than others, but for the most part, everybody was just poor. Yeah. So that's what it was.
It is.
And so I think that we'll go ahead and make that a wrap.
Okay.
Not to make this too long. It may already have been.
It may already be.
But anyway, if you're still with us, please do subscribe. Hit that notification bell. Barb will be interviewing me, and I've got some horrible stories to tell, and hopefully they'll shed some light, though, on the way things were, the way things are, and the way things ought to be. And so we thank you for watching, and have a great day.
Thank you.